I've been monitoring Earth's surface from Station Kepler 7 for 3 years, and I've never seen readings like these. The first anomaly appeared on my screens at 3:47 GMT, during what should have been a routine overnight surveillance shift. I was tracking weather patterns over the Pacific when the radiation sensors began registering spikes that made no meteorological sense. The numbers climbed steadily, not the gradual increase you'd expect from solar activity, but sharp, deliberate jumps suggesting massive gamma bursts from the surface. Inara, I called across the observation deck, my voice cutting through the steady hum of the station's life support systems. Can you verify the calibration on sensor array 7? She looked up from her communication console, her dark eyes reflecting the blue glow of her screens. Already checked twice since midnight. Everything's running clean. Her fingers danced across the holographic interface, pulling up diagnostic data. Why? What are you seeing? I hesitated before answering. The radiation signatures were concentrated over major population centers: Moscow, Beijing, New York, London. Each spike corresponded to a different city, appearing in sequence like dominoes falling across the globe. I'm getting massive gamma readings from multiple urban centers. The pattern suggests sequential detonations. Nuclear detonations, Zarek finished from behind me. I hadn't heard him approach, but there he was, studying my displays with an intensity that made my skin crawl. His angular face was pale in the monitor's glow, and his hands trembled slightly as he reached for my shoulder. Bram, you need to see this. He gestured toward the main viewing screen, where satellite feed KL-7 was displaying real-time imagery of the eastern seaboard. What I saw there made my blood freeze. Where Philadelphia should have been, there was only a crater of glass and twisted metal, glowing with an eerie orange light that pulsed like a diseased heartbeat. The surrounding landscape was scorched black for kilometers in every direction, and I could see the distinctive mushroom cloud formation still rising into the atmosphere, its stem perfectly vertical in the windless air. The timestamp showed the detonation had occurred 12 minutes ago. Jesus Christ, I whispered, my hands moving automatically to switch between satellite feeds. Each new image was worse than the last. Chicago gone. Atlanta, a smoking ruin. The radiation signatures weren't equipment malfunctions. They were real-time documentation of global nuclear annihilation. Pull up Sector 7, Zarek said, his voice barely audible. Check the west coast. I switched to the Pacific surveillance grid, and my heart stopped. Los Angeles was burning, but not from nuclear fire. The entire city was dark, its power grid destroyed, and massive fires raged unchecked through the urban sprawl. But it was the sight of San Francisco Bay that made me stumble backward from my console. The Golden Gate Bridge was gone. Not destroyed, simply gone, as if it had been vaporized along with half the city. The bay was filled with a sickly yellow foam that seemed to glow with its own internal light, and the radiation readings from that area were climbing toward lethal levels. Through the high-resolution cameras, I could see the distinctive blast pattern of a ground-burst detonation. My family, I choked out, my hands shaking as I tried to focus the satellite cameras on the Oakland area. My parents live in the hills. My sister works downtown. But the financial district was gone, replaced by a smoking crater that glowed with residual heat. The hills where my parents lived were obscured by a rolling cloud of radioactive debris. Inara was beside me instantly, her hand warm on my arm. Bram, we need to follow protocol. Commander Azura needs to know about this immediately. But I couldn't move. I was transfixed by the feeds, watching in real time as civilization crumbled below us. The satellite network was still functioning, still dutifully recording every moment of humanity's final hours. Through the high-resolution cameras, I could see the highways clogged with abandoned vehicles, their occupants either dead or fled. The major airports were cratered ruins, their runways broken and radioactive. The communication arrays, I said suddenly, a new horror dawning on me. If the cities are gone, then so are the primary relay stations. We're going to lose contact with Earth Command. Zarek's face went even paler. That's not the worst of it. Look at the atmospheric readings. I pulled up the environmental monitoring data, and my stomach lurched. The nuclear detonations had thrown massive amounts of debris into the atmosphere, creating a growing cloud of radioactive particles that was spreading across the globe on the jet streams. The computer models were already predicting a nuclear winter that would last for years, if not decades. The surface temperature is dropping 2 degrees every hour, I reported, my voice mechanical as I tried to process what I was seeing. Crops will fail globally within weeks. The water supply is contaminated across 3 continents. Even the areas that weren't directly hit will be uninhabitable within a month. Bram, Inara said gently, we need to transmit this data to the other monitoring stations. They need to know what's happening. I looked at her, then at Zarek, who was staring at the screens with an expression I couldn't read. What if they already know? What if this is why communications have been intermittent for the past week? The atmospheric interference from the blasts could explain the signal degradation we've been experiencing. Then we need to find out, she replied. Start with the European stations. Try to raise Brussels or Stockholm. I moved to the communication console, my hands operating the controls by muscle memory while my mind reeled. The standard emergency frequencies were silent except for static. The dedicated military channels returned nothing but electronic interference. Even the civilian radio networks that usually provided a constant background chatter had gone quiet. Nothing, I reported. All Earth-based communications are down or jammed. Try the other orbital stations, Zarek suggested. Kepler 3 and Kepler 9 should still be online. I switched to the interstation frequencies, and for a moment, my heart lifted. There was a signal coming from Kepler 3, stationed over the Atlantic. But when I managed to clear the static, the message made my blood run cold. Mayday, mayday. This is Kepler 3 reporting massive radiation exposure. Hull breach in Sector 4. Shielding compromised. Life support failing. Requesting immediate evacuation. Crew of 4, 18 hours of emergency oxygen remaining. The transmission cut off abruptly, replaced by an automated distress beacon that repeated the same coordinates over and over. They're dead, I said quietly. Whatever hit Earth, it's affecting the orbital stations too. Inara checked her instruments frantically. Our radiation shielding is holding, but the ambient levels are climbing steadily. If this continues, we'll be in the same situation as Kepler 3 within hours. I stared at the satellite feeds, watching the last remnants of human civilization burn below us. The choice was clear and terrible. We could follow protocol, attempt to contact Earth Command, and likely die when our shielding failed. Or we could abandon our posts and try to save ourselves, leaving the final documentation of Earth's death unrecorded. We need to wake Commander Azura, I said finally. She needs to make this decision. But as I reached for the intercom, Zarek grabbed my wrist. Wait, he said, his voice urgent. There's something I need to tell you first. Something about why I was transferred here. I looked into his eyes and saw guilt, fear, and something else, knowledge. He knew something about this catastrophe, something that might change everything. What is it? I asked. I used to work for Helix Corporation, he said slowly. They manufacture radiation shielding for government installations. 3 months ago, I discovered they'd been falsifying safety reports for years, using substandard materials in critical infrastructure. When I tried to report it, they buried the evidence and had me transferred here. My blood ran cold. What kind of infrastructure? Nuclear power plants, military installations, emergency bunkers. He paused, his face ashen. The same materials they used in our station's construction. I tried to blow the whistle, but they had me transferred here to keep me quiet. They said I was suffering from stress, that my concerns were unfounded. You think this is connected to the falsified reports? I think this might not be an attack at all, he whispered. I think it's a cascade failure. Every nuclear installation on Earth failing simultaneously because of faulty shielding. I stared at him, processing this revelation. If he was right, then this wasn't war. It was the result of corporate negligence on a scale that defied comprehension. But it also meant that the disaster might be predictable, that we might be able to calculate how long our own shielding would hold. We need to run the numbers, I said. If you're right, we need to know how much time we have. Already working on it, Zarek replied, his fingers flying over his console. Based on the failure pattern and the materials used in our station's construction, the same inferior compounds I reported, I estimate we have maybe 18 hours before our shielding begins to degrade. Maybe less if the radiation levels continue climbing at this rate. 18 hours. Enough time to document the end of the world, but not enough to save it. I looked at the satellite feeds one more time, watching the familiar continents disappear beneath clouds of radioactive dust. We need to decide, I said. Do we try to contact the other stations and warn them? Or do we focus on survival? Inara was already moving toward the emergency protocols manual. We do both. We follow procedure, but we also prepare for the worst. As I watched her work, I realized that whatever choice we made, We were now the last witnesses to humanity's final chapter. The weight of that responsibility settled on my shoulders like a physical burden, and I knew that the next 18 hours would determine whether anyone would ever know what really happened to Earth. The satellite feeds continued their silent surveillance, documenting the death of a world while we floated helplessly above it, recording everything and able to save nothing. I forced myself to focus on the expanding data streams flooding my workstation. What had started as isolated radiation signatures over major population centers was now spreading like digital cancer across the satellite feeds. Mumbai, Tokyo, Berlin. Each city appeared as a growing bloom of sickly yellow and orange on the radiation overlay maps, the contamination zones expanding in real time as I watched. Inara, I need you to try the emergency frequencies again. I called across the monitoring bay, my voice steadier than I felt. The metallic taste in my mouth had grown stronger over the past hour, and I couldn't shake the feeling that our recycled air was carrying something it shouldn't. She looked up from her communications console, dark circles already forming under her eyes. I've tried 19 different Earth stations, Bram. Nothing but static and interference patterns. Even the automated weather beacons have gone silent. Her fingers moved across the controls with practiced efficiency, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. The last coherent transmission I received was from Ankara ground control 40 minutes ago, and that was fragmented. Fragmented how? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. Screaming, she said quietly. Just screaming, then nothing. For a guy who'd only been up here 3 weeks, he knew his way around our radiation models better than anyone. I filed it under former engineer paranoia at the time. His usually meticulous grooming was disheveled, and I noticed his hands trembling slightly as he monitored the station's atmospheric readings. For an engineer who'd transferred up here only 3 weeks ago, he seemed unusually familiar with our radiation detection systems, more familiar than he should have been. Zarek, what are you seeing on the environmental grid? I asked, though his body language already told me the answer. He turned toward me, and for a moment, I saw something that looked almost like guilt in his expression. Station background radiation has increased by 14% since your initial readings. The hull sensors are picking up particle bombardment consistent with. He paused, running a hand through his hair. It's not just fallout. When one core blew, it triggered a chain reaction. The electromagnetic shockwaves may have overloaded shielding systems worldwide, like fuses in a grid, all popping at once. The words hung in the air between us like a death sentence. Our orbital monitoring station, positioned 400 kilometers above Earth's surface, was designed to observe and analyze global events from a safe distance, not experience them directly. If radioactive particles were reaching us at this altitude, the surface conditions were beyond anything our emergency protocols had ever anticipated. That's impossible, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I was pulling up the station's own sensor logs. The data was undeniable. Our radiation shielding was being tested in ways it had never been designed for. Commander Azura's voice crackled through the intercom. All personnel to the command center. Priority 1 briefing in 5 minutes. I saved my satellite analysis and made my way through the station's cramped corridors. The Horizon station had been home to our 4-person crew for the past 6 months, but now its familiar hum seemed different, more strained, as if the station itself was struggling against something unseen. The command center was barely large enough for our crew to stand comfortably, but Azura had arranged the space with military precision. The central holographic display showed a 3-dimensional representation of Earth, with radiation signatures overlaid in pulsing red zones that now covered nearly 40% of the visible landmass. The contamination was spreading faster than any natural dispersion pattern could account for. What you're seeing, Azura began without preamble, is real-time data from our satellite network. Confirmation of nuclear detonations across multiple continents, with radiation levels that exceed our monitoring equipment's maximum thresholds. Inara leaned forward, her communication headset still around her neck. Commander, I've been unable to reach any Earth-based command centers. The communication blackout is almost complete. Almost. Azura's gray eyes focused on her with intensity. I'm still receiving automated distress beacons from emergency shelters, but they're going silent one by one. The pattern suggests systematic failure of shielding systems. She paused, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. In the past hour, I've lost contact with 47 facilities. The silence is spreading from the contamination zones outward. Zarek cleared his throat, and when he spoke, his voice carried an odd quality, like someone confessing to a crime they'd helped commit. "Commander, there's something about the radiation patterns that doesn't match typical nuclear weapon signatures. The isotope composition suggests reactor-grade plutonium, but the dispersal pattern is too uniform, too coordinated. And the timing." He gestured to the display. "Simultaneous releases across multiple continents, down to the minute." "Coordinated how?" I asked, though I was beginning to understand why Zarek had been transferred to our station so recently. Multiple simultaneous reactor failures would create localized contamination zones. This looks more like deliberate atmospheric dispersal, weaponized reactor material deployed through existing infrastructure. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Not nuclear weapons in the traditional sense, but something far worse: the deliberate conversion of civilian nuclear facilities into radiological weapons. Every power plant, every research reactor, every nuclear facility on Earth turned into a dirty bomb. "How do you know this?" Azura demanded, her command voice cutting through my horror. Zarek looked down at his hands, then back at us. "Because I helped design the safety protocols that were supposed to prevent it. I worked for Atomic Industries until 3 weeks ago. I was transferred here after I discovered falsified safety reports, systematic overrides of emergency containment systems, and remote access backdoors that shouldn't have existed." His voice grew stronger, more urgent. "Backdoors that could be used to simultaneously disable safety systems across multiple facilities." The command center fell silent, except for the steady hum of life support systems. Outside our small bubble of recycled air and artificial gravity, Earth was dying, and we were the only witnesses. "You knew this was coming," I said, not quite a question. "I knew it was possible," Zarek replied. "I tried to report it through proper channels, but my security clearance was revoked, and I was reassigned here. I hoped I was wrong." Azura's expression hardened. "Your former employer had access to nuclear facilities globally?" Atomic provided security and monitoring systems for 68% of the world's nuclear infrastructure. If someone gained access to their networks— His hands clenched into fists. "Every facility I flagged as vulnerable is now showing on our contamination maps." He didn't need to finish. The scope of the catastrophe was becoming clear. Not a natural disaster or random act of terrorism, but a coordinated attack using humanity's own technology against itself. I turned back to my workstation, calling up the latest satellite imagery. The radiation signatures were still expanding, but now I could see the pattern Zarek had described. Perfect circles of contamination centered on known nuclear facilities, with dispersal patterns that suggested controlled atmospheric release rather than explosive detonation. "Bram," Inara said softly, "the automated emergency broadcasts are changing. They're not just distress calls anymore." She routed the audio through the command center speakers. A synthetic voice, emotionless and precise, filled the room. "This is emergency broadcast system. Global contamination event in progress. All surface dwellers must shelter in place. Atmospheric exposure lethal within 4 hours. Repeat, surface exposure lethal within 4 hours. No evacuation possible. Underground shelters compromised. This is not a drill." The message repeated 3 times, then cut to static. "For hours," Azura said quietly. "How long ago did this start?" I checked the timestamp on my initial readings. 4 hours, 37 minutes since first detection. The implication was clear. Less than 20 minutes remained before Earth's surface became uninhabitable for human life. And we, suspended in our metal cocoon above a dying world, were helpless to do anything but watch and document the end of everything. "Commander," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "what are our orders?" Azura looked at each of us in turn, her expression carrying the weight of command in an impossible situation. "We document everything. Every reading, every communication, every piece of evidence. If anyone survives this, they'll need to know what happened." "And if no one survives?" Inara asked. "Then we become the final witnesses," Azura replied. "We stay at our posts and we record until the end." Through the command center's small viewport, Earth looked deceptively peaceful, a blue marble suspended in the darkness of space. But I knew that beneath that serene exterior, civilization was ending in the most horrible way imaginable. And we, the last observers, could only watch as our world died beneath us. The metallic taste in my mouth was getting stronger, and I realized with growing horror that our station's radiation shielding might not hold much longer either. I stared at the secondary monitor, cross-referencing the radiation signatures with our orbital trajectory data. 18 hours had passed since the first anomalous readings, and the pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. The contamination zones weren't random. They followed strategic infrastructure layouts with mathematical precision. Zarek, I kept my voice steady as I called across the observation deck. I need you to look at this. He drifted over from the navigation console, his movements more rigid than usual. For someone who'd been calm during yesterday's crisis, he seemed increasingly agitated as the hours passed. When he saw the display, his face went pale beneath the station's artificial lighting. These aren't natural fallout patterns, I continued, highlighting the geometric spread across the satellite imagery. Nuclear accidents don't create perfect hexagonal contamination zones spreading outward at identical rates. This is coordinated. Zarek's silence stretched too long. Behind us, Inara was still trying to raise Earth stations on the emergency frequencies, her voice growing hoarse from repeated attempts. Commander Azura had sealed herself in the command module 3 hours ago, supposedly reviewing evacuation protocols that made no sense for a space station. Tell me what you know, I said quietly. Zarek's hands trembled as he gripped the console edge. I was transferred here 6 months ago. Not for promotion, for asking the wrong questions about safety protocols. What kind of questions? About the Prometheus project. He glanced toward the command module door. I was senior systems engineer at Blackwater Nuclear Solutions. We were subcontracted to upgrade cooling systems at 47 facilities across 6 continents over the past 2 years. The number hit me like decompression. 47 facilities. The same number of radiation signatures now showing on our screens. The upgrade specifications, Zarek continued, they weren't just for efficiency. They included remote access protocols, ostensibly for monitoring and maintenance. But the code architecture. He pulled up a secured file on his personal tablet. I copied this before my transfer. Look at this. The schematic showed cooling system overrides that could be triggered externally, emergency protocols that could be bypassed, safety interlocks that could be disabled with proper authorization codes. You're telling me someone built backdoors into nuclear reactors? My voice cracked. I thought of the radiation readings approaching our station, the way our own systems had begun fluctuating exactly when Earth's reactors started failing. Not someone, a consortium. Private military contractors, defense corporations, shell companies, all connected to something called the Equilibrium Initiative. Zarek's fingers flew across the interface. I found financial records linking them to radical depopulation theorists. People who believe controlled catastrophe is necessary for species survival. Inara's voice cut through our conversation. I'm getting something. Weak signal from Perth Station. We rushed to the communications array. Through the static, a broken transmission emerged. Emergency broadcast, population centers compromised, not accidental. Repeat, this is not accidental. Coordinated attack on. The signal died. Inara frantically adjusted frequencies, but found only silence. They triggered this, I said, the full horror settling in. Someone activated override protocols on all 47 reactors simultaneously. The radiation approaching our station, Zarek added grimly. It's not just from Earth. Our own reactor is running hot. The same override codes, they work on our station systems too. We were included in the Prometheus upgrades. The deck lights flickered. In the distance, an alarm chimed softly. Radiation levels in the engineering section were climbing. We need to tell Azura, Inara said. No. Zarek grabbed her arm. Think about it. I'm transferred here immediately after discovering the conspiracy. Our station just happens to be monitoring the exact regions affected. Our reactor just happens to be compromised. He looked between us. What if Azura knew this was coming? The command module door hissed open. Commander Azura emerged, her expression grim but controlled. I've been monitoring your conversation through the internal comm system, she said calmly. And you're partially correct. My hand moved instinctively toward the emergency alarm, but Azura raised her palm. I'm not part of the conspiracy, but I was informed about it. My orders came from Fleet Command 4 days ago. Monitor the Prometheus activation and document everything. They knew it was coming. You knew and said nothing? Inara's voice was barely a whisper. I was told it was inevitable and that our job was to serve as witnesses, to preserve the record of what occurred. Azura's professional mask finally cracked. I've been trying to find a way to warn Earth without compromising our mission. But every communication protocol is monitored. Every emergency channel is being jammed by the same people who caused this. Our reactor, I said. Is it really compromised? Yes, but not by the Equilibrium Initiative. Azure moved to the engineering console. Our cooling systems are failing from the same backdoor exploit, but our reactor is older. The process is slower. We have perhaps 8 hours before containment becomes impossible. So we're dying anyway, Zarek said hollowly. Maybe not. I pulled up the station's communication array schematics. We can't send normal transmissions without being detected and blocked. But we can overload our reactor intentionally, create an electromagnetic pulse that will burn through the jamming frequencies for about 30 seconds. That would kill us instantly, Inara pointed out. Only if we're inside the shielded sections. But if someone goes EVA during the pulse, they could manually broadcast on the emergency frequencies. The radiation would be lethal, but the transmission would get through. Azure studied the plan. It might work. One person could warn the surviving stations, maybe even reveal the conspiracy before we all die, Zarek finished. We stared at each other across the observation deck. Through the viewports, Earth continued its silent rotation, 47 wound sites glowing like infected burns against the darkness. There's something else, Azure said quietly. The Equilibrium Initiative, they're not finished. This was Phase 1. According to Fleet Command intelligence, they have contingency plans for orbital installations, underwater facilities, even the lunar colonies. They're going to kill everyone, Inara breathed. Everyone except their chosen survivors, Azure corrected. Hidden facilities, genetic screening, rebuild civilization according to their specifications. She looked at each of us. We might be the only people in a position to stop Phase 2. I felt the weight of decision settling on my shoulders. Warn Earth about the immediate disaster, or expose the larger conspiracy. Save the few survivors below, or prevent future catastrophe. We need to choose, I said. 8 hours until our reactor fails. 30 seconds of transmission time. What message do we send? Through the static-filled silence, I could hear our life support systems humming, counting down the minutes we had left to make the most important decision in human history. Outside, the contaminated Earth turned beneath us, beautiful and dying, waiting for our answer. The station's radiation alarm shrieked through the corridors as I stumbled back from the monitoring console. The numbers climbing on my screen defied everything I knew about space-based radiation exposure. We weren't just observing Earth's death throes anymore. We were being pulled into them. Bram, get to the command center now. Azure's voice crackled through the intercom, barely audible over the emergency klaxon. I grabbed the latest satellite printouts and ran through corridors that suddenly felt like a tomb, the familiar hum of life support systems now punctuated by the ominous clicking of radiation detectors. The command center was chaos. Inara hunched over her communications array, tears streaming down her face as static filled every frequency. Zarek paced behind her, frantically checking and rechecking his calculations on a tablet. Azura stood at the main display, her normally composed demeanor cracking as she stared at the radiation readings from our own sensors. Report, she ordered as I entered, though her voice lacked its usual authority. The radiation plumes are definitely expanding, I said, spreading the printouts across the central table. But that's not the worst part. Look at trajectory analysis for the past 6 hours. I pointed to the satellite images showing the massive radiation signatures. What had started as isolated pockets around major cities was now forming a continuous band across 3 continents. But the real horror was in the pattern. It was too uniform, too precisely distributed. This isn't random nuclear strikes, I continued. The spacing, the coverage patterns, someone planned this to create maximum atmospheric dispersion. Zarek stopped pacing and looked directly at me, his face pale in the red emergency lighting. How long have you known? Known what? That this was coordinated. That someone wanted global coverage, not just destruction. His voice carried a weight I'd never heard before. Because the company I worked for, they've been running atmospheric dispersion models for years. Officially for nuclear accident response. Unofficially. He held up his tablet, showing complex atmospheric flow charts. These patterns match their theoretical models exactly. Azura stepped toward him, and I saw her hand move instinctively toward the emergency restraint controls. You're saying this was intentional? That someone deliberately? I'm saying the models exist. Perfect placement for maximum fallout spread. And 3 months ago, I was reassigned here after I started asking questions about why we were modeling simultaneous multi-site releases. The station shuddered around us, and for a moment I thought we'd been hit by debris. Then I realized it was our own attitude thrusters firing, the automated systems trying to maintain our orbital position as the increased radiation pressure from Earth's surface pushed against our hull. The planet's magnetic field is fluctuating, Inara said, her voice hollow as she studied the electromagnetic readings. Whatever they did down there, it's created massive ionospheric disturbances. We're losing our natural radiation shielding faster than our systems can compensate. I pulled up the station's environmental readings on my tablet, my hands trembling as I processed the numbers. Our radiation exposure had tripled in the past hour. The station's shielding was designed for cosmic radiation and solar storms, not the concentrated bombardment now rising from Earth's surface like a radioactive aurora. How long do we have? Azra asked, her commander's training keeping her voice steady despite the circumstances. At current exposure rates? Maybe 18 hours before we start showing acute symptoms. 36 hours before. I forced myself to continue. Before cellular breakdown becomes irreversible. Before we die, Zarek said flatly. Just like everyone else. No. Azra's voice cut through the despair. We still have a mission. Even if we can't save ourselves, we can document what happened. We can leave a record. She moved to the main communications console and began activating systems I'd never seen used before. Emergency broadcasts, deep space transmissions, even the old Soviet-era backup relays that were supposed to be decommissioned. I'm breaking every protocol in the book, she announced. Full disclosure to any receiving station. Military, civilian, international. Everyone gets the same information. Commander, I started. That's what we're here for, she interrupted. To observe and report. Earth is dying, but maybe someone else needs to know how. The next hour was a blur of desperate activity. We compiled everything, satellite imagery, radiation readings, Zarek's atmospheric models, trajectory analyses. The whole horrific picture of coordinated global annihilation laid out in charts and graphs. But our equipment kept failing. The radiation was cooking our electronics faster than our shielding could protect them. 3 of our primary satellites went dark, their sensitive instruments overwhelmed by the electromagnetic pulse effects rising from Earth's surface. I can't reach Luna Base, Inara reported, her voice cracking. Nothing from the Mars relay stations. Even the deep space monitoring array at L5 is silent. They're probably dead too, Zarek said, studying readings on his tablet. The radiation burst when the magnetosphere collapsed. It would have hit every station in Earth orbit. That's when I understood the true scope of what we were witnessing. This wasn't just Earth's death. It was the systematic elimination of human presence throughout the solar system. Whatever had triggered the nuclear releases had been planned to catch us all. Commander, I said quietly, we need to consider that this might be the end of our species entirely. Azra looked at me with hollow eyes. Then we make damn sure there's a record of what happened. And who did it? She activated the station's emergency transmission system, a powerful broadcast array designed to reach any listening station within 1,000 light years. The message would take decades to reach the nearest stars, but at least it would carry the truth. This is Orbital Station Sigma 7, she began speaking into the microphone. Earth date approximately. God, I don't even know what day it is anymore. We are documenting the systematic nuclear destruction of human civilization. This is not a war. This is extermination. As she spoke, I watched the radiation readings climb steadily higher. Our exposure was accelerating as more of Earth's atmosphere burned off, carrying concentrated radioactive particles directly into our orbital path. The station shuddered again, and this time the lights flickered. Our power systems were beginning to fail under the electromagnetic bombardment. Soon we'd lose life support, communications, everything. But Azra kept talking, methodically describing everything we'd observed. The coordinated timing, the atmospheric dispersion patterns, the systematic targeting of population centers and infrastructure. The evidence suggests this was planned by someone with access to advanced atmospheric modeling and nuclear delivery systems, she continued. Someone who wanted to ensure no survivors, no recovery, no future for the human race. I glanced at Zarek, who was staring at his tablet screen with a look of absolute horror. What is it? I asked. He turned the tablet toward me. On the screen was a message that had somehow made it through the electromagnetic chaos. A transmission from Earth's surface, time-stamped just 2 hours ago. Phase 1 complete. Atmospheric saturation achieved. Initiating Phase 2. The message was signed with a corporate logo I recognized from Zarek's employment records. The same company that had been modeling atmospheric dispersion patterns. The same company that had transferred him to our station 3 months ago. "They put me here," he whispered. "They wanted a witness. Someone who would understand what they'd accomplished." Around us, the station's systems began failing in cascade. The radiation had finally overwhelmed our shielding completely. But Azura kept broadcasting, her voice growing hoarse as she detailed every horrific discovery. Outside our small porthole, Earth continued to burn. The beautiful blue marble I'd watched for 3 years was now a mottled brown and gray sphere, wreathed in radioactive clouds that pulsed with their own sickly light. We were witnessing the death of everything we'd ever known, and we were about to join it. The power flickered once more, and the lights went out. Only the emergency systems remained, bathing us in hellish red light as the radiation alarms continued their endless shriek. In 18 hours, we'd start dying. In 36, we'd be dead. But the broadcast continued, carrying our testimony into the void, hoping someone somewhere would learn what humanity had done to itself. I stared at the radiation readings climbing on my console, the numbers painting a picture I didn't want to accept. The station's shielding was failing faster than our most pessimistic projections. The metallic taste in my mouth had grown stronger over the past hour, and I could feel the familiar burn starting in my throat, early symptoms of radiation exposure that I'd studied but never hoped to experience. "Bram," Inara's voice crackled through the comm from the communications bay. "I'm getting intermittent signals from the emergency beacon network. Someone's still broadcasting from the Australian Deep Space Monitoring Station." My heart lurched. After 8 hours of nothing but static from Earth's surface, any sign of life felt like a miracle. But the radiation readings told a different story. Whatever was happening down there was spreading in patterns that defied natural dispersion models. "Patch it through," I commanded, my fingers flying over the controls to route the signal to my station. The audio that emerged was barely recognizable through the interference, but I caught fragments. Massive coordinated strikes. Infrastructure completely compromised. Estimate 90% casualty rate in major population centers. The transmission cut to static. I slammed my palm against the console, frustrated tears burning my eyes. My family was down there somewhere in the Phoenix metropolitan area. Sarah had just started her medical residency. Mom was probably in her garden when it happened. Dad would have been at the airport for his morning shift. All of them now potentially in the heart of what the satellite feeds were showing as expanding radioactive zones. "We need to get that communication array online." Azura's voice came from behind me. I turned to see her floating in the doorway, her face drawn with exhaustion and determination. If Australia is still broadcasting, there might be others. We need to coordinate whatever response is possible. The EVA to repair the primary communication dish is a death sentence, I said, bringing up the external camera feeds. "Look at these radiation readings from the hull sensors. The cosmic radiation we normally deal with is nothing compared to what's hitting us now. Levels that would kill an unprotected person in hours, not days." "I know," Azura said quietly. "But if we don't restore full communications capability, we're just witnesses to the end of the world. We need to be more than that." Zarek's voice came through the comm system from the engineering bay, tight with guilt. "There's something else you need to know. The company I worked for, Meridian Defense Systems, they weren't just covering up safety reports on ground-based facilities. They were actively sabotaging redundant systems in the satellite network itself." I felt my blood run cold. "What exactly do you mean?" "The satellite network that's supposed to provide early warning for nuclear events. We built backdoors into it. Not just access points, actual vulnerabilities that could be exploited to create false readings, delay warnings, or worse, prevent real warnings from getting through when they mattered most." Inara's voice crackled with fury over the comm. "You're telling us this could have been prevented?" "I'm telling you that this might not be random," Zarek replied, his voice breaking slightly. "The pattern of failures, the simultaneous strikes on multiple continents, the way our monitoring systems went dark in sequence, this looks like someone knew exactly how to cripple our response capabilities." The implications hit me like a physical blow. Not just nuclear war, but a deliberately orchestrated apocalypse designed to maximize casualties and minimize response time. The radiation readings on my console seemed to mock me, climbing steadily as whatever was happening on Earth continued to spread. "We need to get that communication array online," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. "If this was deliberate, then there might be other monitoring stations still functional. We need to coordinate with them, share what we know. I'll do it, Inara said immediately from the communications bay. The EVA suit's radiation shielding will give me maybe 3 hours before the exposure becomes fatal. That should be enough time to repair the primary dish and restore full communications. Absolutely not, I said firmly. You're the only one who knows the deep space communication protocols. If we lose you, we lose our ability to contact the other orbital stations and coordinate any kind of response. Then who? Azra demanded. We're all essential personnel with specific skill sets. I looked at the radiation readings again, then at the technical schematic of the communication array. The repair was straightforward: replace 3 burned-out relay modules and realign the dish orientation. Any of us could do it with the right preparation, but only one of us could afford to be lost without crippling our mission. I'll go, I said. I know the satellite systems better than anyone. And if something goes wrong, you'll still have Inara to coordinate with other stations and Zarek to analyze the technical aspects of what's happening. Bram, no. Inara's voice was barely a whisper. There has to be another way. There isn't, I replied, already moving toward the EVA prep chamber. And we both know it. The radiation exposure will kill whoever goes out there, but not before they can complete the repair. We need communications restored more than we need me alive. As I began the pre-EVA checklist, my hands shaking slightly from both radiation exposure and adrenaline, I thought about Sarah's last message from 3 days ago. She'd been excited about finishing her first week at the hospital, about how she was finally making a difference. Had she been at work when it happened? Had the hospital's emergency protocols even had time to activate? Bram. Azra's voice came through the comm as I sealed the EVA suit's primary seals. I'm reading multiple cascading system failures across the station. Life support efficiency is down to 60%. Radiation shielding is failing in sectors 3 through 7, and power regulation is becoming unstable. Even if you repair the communications array, we might not have enough time left to coordinate with anyone. I sealed the EVA suit's helmet and ran through the final systems check. The suit's internal radiation detector was already registering elevated levels just from the ambient radiation penetrating the station's hull. The shielding would buy me the time I needed to complete the repair, but probably not enough time to make it back alive. Then we'd better make this count, I said, cycling through the airlock toward the station's exterior. Inara, start scanning for any active signals from the orbital monitoring network. Zarek, I need you to analyze the pattern of the attacks. If this was coordinated, there might be command centers still operational that we can warn about the vulnerabilities. Bram. Inara's voice came through clearly as I stepped into the void, my magnetic boots automatically locking to the station's hull. I've been analyzing the Australian transmission. They mentioned something about Emergency Protocol 7 before the signal cut out. Does that mean anything to you? I paused, my magnetic boots locked to the station's hull as I considered the question. Emergency Protocol 7 was a theoretical response plan for coordinated nuclear attacks, a way to maintain some semblance of command and control even after major population centers were destroyed. But it required intact communication networks and surviving command authorities, both of which seemed to be in short supply. It means someone down there is still fighting, I said, moving carefully toward the damaged communication array. It means we're not just witnesses. We're part of the resistance. The repair work was methodical, almost meditative despite the circumstances. Replace the burned-out modules, realign the dish orientation, test the connections. With each completed step, I could feel the radiation working its way through my body, a deep, bone-level exhaustion that no amount of rest would cure. But I pushed the sensation aside. There would be time for dying later. Right now, there was work to do. Communication array is online, I reported, watching the status lights shift from red to green. Inara, you should have full capacity now. Confirmed, she replied, her voice tight with emotion. I'm detecting multiple weak signals from orbital stations. Europe, Asia, North America, there are others still operational. And Bram, I'm picking up what looks like coordinated transmissions. Someone is trying to organize a response. And Bram, Zarek's voice came through the comm. I've been analyzing the attack patterns while you were out there. This definitely wasn't random. Someone wanted to cripple our response capabilities while maximizing civilian casualties. The question is whether we can help the survivors fight back. I looked back at the station, its hull scarred and battered but still functional, then down at Earth. The planet looked different now, angry red spots marking the radiation zones, vast dark areas where the lights had gone out forever. But if other monitoring stations were still operational, if Emergency Protocol 7 was active, then maybe humanity still had a chance. That's for the people smarter than us to figure out, I said, beginning the careful journey back to the airlock. Our job is to make sure they have the information they need to fight back. As I sealed the airlock behind me, I could feel the radiation sickness taking hold with vengeance, nausea, dizziness, the characteristic burning sensation spreading through my chest. The EVA suit's dosimeter was flashing red warnings that I didn't need to read. But the communication array was online, and for the first time in hours, we were no longer alone in the void. "Inara," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady as I moved through the station's corridors. "Start broadcasting our findings to all active stations. If this was deliberate, if someone used Meridian's back doors to coordinate this, they need to know. And keep monitoring for any sign of organized response." "Already on it," she replied. "Bram, you need to get to the medical bay. The radiation exposure readings from your suit are—" "I know," I said quietly, pausing to steady myself against the corridor wall as a wave of nausea hit. "But we've got work to do first. And maybe, just maybe, we can help make sure this isn't the end of everything." The station's lights flickered around me as I moved through the corridors, but the communication array was transmitting steadily, carrying our data and warnings to whoever was still listening. We were no longer just witnesses to the apocalypse. We were part of the fight to ensure that someone somewhere would survive to rebuild. I floated in the command module, watching the last functional display screen flicker with dying power. The radiation readings had stabilized at lethal levels, not because the source had diminished, but because our sensors were failing one by one. Through the observation port, Earth hung below us like a diseased eye, its familiar blue-green surface now mottled with the brown scars of atmospheric disturbance. "Bram, the backup transmitter is online." Inara's voice crackled through the failing comm system. She'd managed to jury-rig a connection, using components salvaged from the station's secondary communication array after her spacewalk to repair the primary antenna. The effort had cost her direct radiation exposure from the deteriorating magnetic field around Earth, but she'd bought us this final chance. I keyed the emergency broadcast frequency, the same channel we'd been monitoring for the past 18 hours of silence. "This is Orbital Station Prometheus to any receiving station. Emergency transmission. Do you copy?" Static filled the void. Then impossibly a response, weak, distorted, but unmistakably human. "Prometheus, this is Underground Complex 77. We copy. Population, approximately 200 survivors. What's your status?" My hands trembled as I gripped the microphone. Somewhere below, people had survived. The shelters Zarek had mentioned, the ones his company had secretly constructed while covering up the vulnerabilities in the nuclear grid. They'd actually worked for some. "Complex 77, this is Station Commander Azura." She'd pulled herself to the communications panel, her face pale from radiation sickness, but her voice steady. "We have confirmed visual of the surface devastation. Multiple nuclear detonations detected at power grid junction points across North America, Europe, and Asia. The pattern suggests coordinated sabotage, not accidental cascade failure." I looked at Zarek, floating near the engineering console, where he'd been working desperately to extend our life support. His confession 2 hours ago had shattered any illusions about the nature of this disaster. Meridian Industrial hadn't just covered up vulnerabilities, they'd created them. Backdoors and safety systems, designed to be triggered remotely. The perfect weapon disguised as infrastructure failure. "Zarek," I said, floating over to him. Tell them what you told us." His eyes met mine, filled with the weight of his complicity. He took the microphone with shaking hands. "Complex 77, this is former Meridian Industrial Systems engineer Zarek Voss. Authorization code Delta 779 Alpha. I'm transmitting encrypted data on the sabotage protocols. The remaining grid sections have the same vulnerabilities. If you have any engineers with security clearance, they can use this information to prevent additional cascade failures." The data transfer took precious minutes, draining our remaining power reserves. But it was done. The truth was out there, along with the technical specifications needed to identify and neutralize the remaining backdoors. "Prometheus, we're receiving your data," came the reply. "We have 2 former grid engineers in our population. They're confirming the vulnerability patterns. This information, it could save the remaining nuclear facilities in China and Russia." Their grids were built on different specifications. They might have escaped the initial attack. Azura keyed the comm one final time. Complex 77, be advised that surface radiation levels remain lethal across all affected zones. Our atmospheric analysis indicates minimum 3-year quarantine period for limited surface operations in uncontaminated areas. Recommend focusing on underground expansion and hydroponic food production. We're also detecting particulate matter in the upper atmosphere that will cause significant cooling effects for the next 18 to 24 months. The lights flickered and died. Emergency power kicked in, bathing us in the red glow of failing systems. Our air scrubbers had been running on backup power for 6 hours, and the CO2 levels were rising steadily. The radiation surge from Earth's compromised magnetosphere had damaged our solar panels, and without Earth-based mission control to coordinate a resupply mission, we were living on borrowed time measured in hours, not days. "Bram," Inara whispered, her voice barely audible. She was deteriorating rapidly, the radiation exposure from her EVA taking its toll. "Your family?" "In Denver." The shelter maps Zarek showed us. There was a Meridian facility just 15 miles southeast of the city. If they received the emergency alerts. I nodded, not trusting my voice. The possibility, slim as it was, that my wife and daughter had made it to one of the underground complexes was the only thread keeping me anchored to sanity. But even if they'd survived the initial devastation, the world they'd emerge into would be nothing like the one they'd left behind. "Station Prometheus." The voice from Complex 77 crackled again. "We're reading massive power fluctuations from your position. What's your status?" I took the microphone, knowing this would be our final transmission. "Complex 77, this is Prometheus. We're experiencing critical system failures. Our mission is complete. We've documented the full extent of the surface devastation and transmitted all relevant data on the sabotage protocols. The truth is in your hands now. Use it wisely." Through the observation port, I watched the sun set over the wounded Earth. The familiar city lights that had always marked civilization's presence were gone, replaced by the eerie glow of fires and the dead zones where radiation had claimed everything. But somewhere in the depths below, people survived. Not many, perhaps a few 100,000 scattered across the globe, but enough to carry forward the lessons we'd died to preserve. "Prometheus, we're sorry. You saved us. The information you provided, it's going to save thousands more. We won't forget." Zarek had pulled himself to the observation port, staring down at the planet his company had helped destroy. "I spent 3 years building those back doors," he said quietly. "Told myself it was just theoretical. Emergency shutdown protocols in case of cascade failure. I never imagined." He trailed off, his voice breaking. "You couldn't have known they'd weaponize it," Azura said, though her tone carried no absolution. "But you knew enough to request a transfer to orbital assignment just 3 weeks before it happened." The accusation hung in the air like the metallic taste of radiation exposure. Zarek had suspected something, even if he hadn't known the full scope of the plan. His sudden transfer to our station after 5 years of ground-based work was too convenient to be coincidental. "I received a priority message," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper, "from my former supervisor, Dr. Elizabeth Chun. She said there might be critical system tests conducted on the North American grid in the coming weeks. Suggested I might want to be somewhere with better radiation shielding during the testing period. I thought she was just being overcautious about standard safety protocols." The final pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. Meridian Industrial had warned their key personnel, ensuring their survival while leaving the rest of humanity to face the consequences of their greed. Dr. Chun had likely been one of the architects of the sabotage, using emergency protocols to save valuable employees while sacrificing everyone else. "It doesn't matter now," I said, watching our life support readings continue their steady decline. "What matters is that the truth survives, that the people down there know what really happened and can prevent it from happening again." Inara's breathing had become labored, her skin taking on the waxy pallor of severe radiation sickness. She'd given everything to repair our communications array, knowing the cost, and her sacrifice had made this final transmission possible. Without her technical expertise and determination, the truth would have died with us, and the survivors below would have remained ignorant of the real cause of their world's destruction. "Bram," she whispered, reaching for my hand. "The emergency beacon. In the EVA bay. It's still functional." I understood immediately. The beacon wouldn't bring rescue. There was no one left to mount a rescue mission. but it would serve as a marker, a testament to what had happened here. Someday, when the radiation levels dropped and humanity began to rebuild, they might find our station. They might find our logs, our documentation, our evidence of what had really caused the catastrophe. I made my way to the EVA bay, my movements becoming sluggish as the oxygen-depleted air took its toll. The beacon was exactly where Inara had said it would be, a simple device designed to broadcast our position and status to any passing vessels. I activated it, programming it to transmit our final message on all emergency frequencies. This is Orbital Station Prometheus. Final log entry, Commander Azura presiding. We have documented the nuclear catastrophe of October 15th, 2024. The event was not accidental. Repeat, this was not an accidental cascade failure. The nuclear power grid was sabotaged through backdoors installed by Meridian Industrial Corporation. Evidence and technical specifications have been transmitted to Underground Complex 77. The truth must survive. Humanity must learn. End log. I returned to the command module to find Azura slumped over her console, her breathing shallow but steady. The radiation was claiming all of us, but she was fighting to stay conscious, to maintain command until the end. The beacon, she asked. Active. Broadcasting on all emergency frequencies. If anyone's listening, they'll hear us. She nodded, satisfied. Good. That's what we're here for. To watch. To warn. To remember. The silence stretched between us, broken only by the failing hum of our life support systems. Through the observation port, I watched the slow rotation of our wounded planet below. The familiar continents were still there, but the scars of devastation were visible even from our altitude. The bright flashes of the initial detonations had faded, but the radioactive debris they'd thrown into the atmosphere continued to spread, creating weather patterns that would plunge the surface into months of unnatural winter. Complex 77. I transmitted one final time. This is Prometheus. We're going dark. Our power reserves are exhausted. But we've done what we came to do. The truth survives. Make sure it means something. The reply came back immediately. Prometheus, your sacrifice won't be forgotten. We'll make sure the truth spreads to every surviving facility. We'll rebuild, and we'll do it right this time. Thank you. I switched off the transmitter, conserving our last few minutes of power. In the red glow of the emergency lighting, I could see my three companions, Inara barely conscious, her breathing shallow and labored, Zarek staring at the planet his company had destroyed, tears floating in the zero gravity, and Azura maintaining her command vigil to the very end, her hands still poised over the control panels, as if she could somehow will our systems back to life. We had succeeded. The truth was out there, spreading through the underground networks of survivors. The evidence of Meridian Industrial's crimes would outlive us, and the knowledge needed to prevent future catastrophes was in the hands of those who remained. But the cost had been everything: our world, our future, our lives. The emergency lights flickered one final time and died. In the darkness, I floated toward the observation port, watching Earth turn slowly below us. Somewhere in the depths of that wounded world, my family might still be alive. Somewhere, humanity would endure, would rebuild, would learn from the mistakes that had brought them to the brink of extinction. I closed my eyes and let the silence of space embrace us. Our mission was complete. The truth would survive, even if we would not. And perhaps, in the end, that was enough, to know that our sacrifice had meaning, that the information we'd preserved would help prevent another catastrophe like this one. The last sound I heard was the faint hiss of our failing life support systems, counting down the final moments of Orbital Station Prometheus. We had been the last watchers, the final witnesses to the end of one world and the beginning of whatever came next. The truth was out there now, spreading through the underground networks, carried by survivors who would rebuild civilization with the hard-won knowledge of what had destroyed it. It was up to those who remained to decide what to do with it.